Hi, welcome back to Man vs. Land. My name is Sarah Holland, and I have still with me Attorney Lamper. Thank you so much for staying to do some more chatting.
Thank you for letting me stay.
Yeah, so we're just gonna have like a casual conversation because like we do and talk about all the topics. And as always, if you guys have any questions that you want us to float his way or talk about anything specific in upcoming episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on our Facebook page or me specifically. My contact information is at the end of this episode. All right, so one question that I actually saw, I'm a big TikTok fan. So there is a title attorney out of Florida and she does a great job. And she is like, hey, listen, don't ever buy a property with a friend unless you have some sort of other agreement as to division of duties.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So you've got yourself into a relationship if you buy something with a friend. And
Yeah.
unless you go to court for a forced sale, a partition of the property, you're stuck with that person.
Yeah.
You also can deed your interest away.
Yeah.
And so if you and I own property, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I deed the property to someone else. You've got a new person to play with. That wasn't your choice.
I think that's hilarious. And when I teach pre-licensing, this always comes up when we talk about the different ways to take title.
Right.
And I'm just like, yeah, so you could just, if you don't like the person that you own it with, you can sell it to somebody else and they have a new roommate. And people are like, wait, that's a thing? Like, yes. How often is it? I don't know.
Never seen it happen. But it is a legal possibility just by doing that. I've also seen when, let's say that if you and I, whether we're married or in some kind of relationship where if I passed, I would want the property to go to you, and likewise. So that's called joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Yep. And your deed has to say that. If it doesn't say that, it's not that. Or there's tenants in common. Mm-hmm. So we have an investment property. I die, my interest has to get probated and will go to my heirs, pursuant to my will or intestacy. So it really depends, and perhaps you put up most of the money, and now half of that property is going to belong to someone else. I advise that people don't go into it like that. I think it's wiser to buy it with some kind of, joint venture entity like a LLC or some, a organized partnership or small corporation, because then you've set up all the rules.
Right.
What's going to happen if someone wants to sell?
Right.
Right of first refusal for buying those shares, which then entitles them to the ownership.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Those are the wiser ways to do it. There's a lot more devil in the details than, oh, we're going to make a packet from this and we'll sell it when we want to. I don't feel like working on the property. I never go. You put $40,000 into it. It's time to sell, and I hold my hand out there.
Right.
So.
And I think that's a really good point to make, is that these agreements, these partnerships, these contracts, essentially is what they are.
Exactly.
Is they should address every possibility. And every relationship is good until it's not. And you got to think about the not part, right? What happens? Because that contract is going to give you direction as to how to proceed when things start falling apart.
Right.
So it can't just be like a one-liner, we're in a partnership now. Like, what does that mean? Yeah.
Because you have to determine if let's say we hold it in an LLC and one of us does die, then is it all yours? Or do you have to pay out to the named beneficiary? If it's large enough, buying life insurance on each other. So if something happens to me, you own the LLC, the life insurance pays out my loved one, and it's all yours. So everyone is made whole. And so I actually have a client now who's thinking to take someone into their entity, and the devil is in the details to the operating agreement for the LLC at this point. What happens with all this? Because these are two hardworking young individuals who are going to do great, but someday they might get married, someday they might have kids, someday they might not agree, and so that's all the things that they need to contemplate. It's daunting.
Interesting. Okay, so this brings me back to a question that I asked you a couple of months ago, and this is, don't take me out with this what I'm going to say next. So we live in a college town. This is a college town, right? And there are specific rules on campus as to how long you need to stay on campus before you can move off and live in off-campus housing, right? You have to meet certain requirements. I had asked you, because we had a number of folks that were interested in property I represented here in town, how they could take ownership that would satisfy those requirements, which largely looked like either you're a fully matriculated student or your primary residence is you own a property within a certain radius of campus. So we had talked about folks having a business and all of the parties that were unrelated that wanted to live in that property were members of the business that owned that property. And can you talk about that a little bit? This is not legal advice, by the way. We are just bantering.
Completely isn't legal.
None of this is legal advice.
So that would be, so one of the downfalls from that is that it is most likely, we're talking about college students.
Yeah.
So we're going to assume that they're 18, so they're adults.
Yes.
But they're not the ones writing the checks for this. Let's be honest about that. It's going to be their parents.
Yeah.
But if we want the kids, young adults, to be members of these LLCs, they're the ones who get to actually decide on all these, how the LLC is administrated and enforce the rights for that. So you really have it by proxy. You've got the parents who are paying for these things, and you might get around a rule so these kids can live off campus.
Right.
However, you've just put you really have given the inmates to run the asylum at that point, and I think it's very financially dangerous for any of the other parents who are paying for these things.
Yeah.
So I would discourage it and say you live on campus so you can't live on campus, and get permission and move off. Yeah. It's one of those things. It's a great real estate opportunity if you can for like you as a real estate agent to find ways for these people to be able to buy.
Right.
So so I've even thought about it a little more since you mentioned it. What a bad idea it is. It's just a dangerous idea.
It's like one of those tools that if in the right situation, it can be deployed flawlessly.
Right.
But for the majority of folks, it may cause more harm than good. Over time.
You would have to tell me that, oh yes, we're all family members. These are all the aunts and uncles. We just happen to have all of our children who are cousins to each other going to school together.
Yeah.
Everything is amazing and wonderful. We don't have any issues. We all have disposable income. We can do these things, and we really want our kids to be able to live together.
Yeah.
So it's unlikely that this would work for most folks. But it comes to say that we're not talking about college kids. That someone else, you can collaborate.
Yeah.
And because things are expensive.
Yes.
And so you can find a way that if you could all go in together, and you get that operating agreement. Those are the rules that are going to say, when things are good, this is how we deal with things. When things are bad, these are how we deal with things.
Yeah. Which
is enforceable in court.
Yeah.
And so and I don't do an awful lot of those because I can never get that many people to agree. And a lot of it is a wing and a prayer when I do an LLC. Like, we'll be fine.
Right.
But most of what I do, honestly, I deal with very real people and small businesses. It'd be like, you and your spouse are buying property and you buy it in the name of an LLC. That's generally what I run into for most folks who are doing that.
Well, right, and like we've said a number of times, the contract, right? All of these documents are contracts.
Yeah.
That it's only as good as the information that's in there.
Yeah.
And way back at the beginning of my career, I believe you drew up a partnership agreement for me, and in like less than 2 months it was dissolved.
Yeah.
Like so you need to know the people that you're going into with it, and how to get out if it goes wrong.
And even I take that one step further. Every contract is just paper.
Yeah.
And even though it might say on paper what you're supposed to do, it's only two things: the willingness of the parties to comply with it, and then when they don't comply with it, it's going to be the edict of the court to say how they interpret it and what the parties are supposed to do.
Right.
It's because otherwise, I keep saying, revocable trust, if you don't use it right, it's expensive paper. A contract can be expensive paper if you have no intent to follow the rules set forth in it.
That's probably the most frustrating thing in my job, is knowing that, like, regardless of what people agree to, some may just decide not to continue agreeing with the thing that they had
Right.
originally agreed to. And the only recourse, the only teeth associated with it is someone pulling out their wallet and going to court.
Right.
And that, I mean, I feel like it's only for folks who are willing to follow the rules.
Exactly. And court isn't free.
Court
And
is not free.
New Hampshire is a conservative state in its judiciary. They do not liberally award attorney's fees. We have a contract together. We both in good faith think the other person has breached it. I sue you. Well, I decide to pay $10,000.
Right.
Well, what if I'm only suing over $5,000? I wouldn't do that.
Right.
I personally wouldn't do that. I know people who would do that. And let's say that I win, so I get $10,000 from you. I just spent $10,000 on my attorney's fees. I say, Your Honor, I want to get attorney's fees from her. She should have to pay for me having to sue her. They'll look at the case, and unless you had done something egregious, unless it was set forth in the contract that if you do this, you'll have to pay attorney's fees.
Yeah.
It's by no means an automatic, and I think it's, at least my experience, and I'm not a litigator. I did that a very little bit, realized I'm awful at it and I shouldn't be doing it, and I dislike it, most importantly. But there are never attorney's fees or awarded at all. You litigate at your own peril.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's talk more about litigating. What happens if I notice that my neighbor is building a fence over the property line? What do I do?
First thing you do is say, "Hey, Bob, you're building your property on my yard," and Bob's going to say, "No, I'm not." So the best thing is to do not self-help, as in to go knock down the fence. Bob, I think we have a disagreement here. I look at the plan, you look at your deed description. I can see that there's some debate about it. You can get a plot plan, or preferably, which is expensive, and I hear now that it's another 12 weeks out to be able to get a surveyor out there.
Or more, yeah.
Yeah, so then you've paid thousands of dollars to determine that.
Yeah.
And so if Bob keeps putting that fence up, you guys can't get to an agreement, then you can sue Bob for trespass.
Yeah.
Which means you'll have to hire a surveyor. You'll have to go through all those expenses that if it's arguable mistake, you're not going to get reimbursed from Bob.
Right.
So, but that's really what you do. I mow those 3 feet. I mow 3 feet of my neighbor's yard all the time. It's not mine.
Yeah.
It will never be mine. They know it's his.
Yeah.
I have a nicer lawn. I mow those feet because it looks better for both of us. It will never be mine.
Yeah.
Doesn't care. Some people really do care. And some people say, like, "Oh, I've been mowing that for this amount of time, so now it's mine."
Yeah.
Which is called adverse possession, which we talked about a little bit ago.
If you've ever been through a real estate class, so many folks like grab onto this notion that they can acquire land for free just by essentially occupying it for a period of 20 years.
Yeah.
And it is more difficult than that.
It is far more difficult, and I'll just give you the quick acronym and try to do this in a minute or two. But if you do meet the requirements, you get it.
Yeah.
You get the property.
Yeah.
But the devil's in the detail, because we're not going to agree when all this happened. The acronym that I think I learned in law school was called COACH. So COACH. C is for like the countdown period. For the time for adverse possession is 20 years. The next one is open and notorious, meaning I'm not hiding in a bunker underneath and going to pop up 20 years later and say this property is mine. I'm actively using the properity. It can be discerned by just going there to see whether or not that I'm occupying the property. COA, so it means to be actual possession and occupancy of the property. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say that it's a mountain cabin that's only accessible 3 months a year because there's landslides and stuff. So I only have to occupy it those 3 months a year. Let's say that is a island property. Lakes freeze, it's dangerous, or it doesn't freeze, you can't get out there. So it's only accessible 4 months a year. I go those 4 months a year. The fact, basically, if there's a seasonal attribute to the property, I only have to possess it during that seasonal portion. Because otherwise, you'd actually need to be on the property. You need to be using the property. Sometimes you might just adverse possess a portion thereof. So if this is the entire parcel, but you've built a fence just right here, and you've occupied that, you can adverse possess just that portion of it. Or perhaps you just have your house and fence here, but you've built some trails and you've done some logging. So you have some colorable argument to having adverse possess the whole thing, although your spread doesn't encompass it all. You might be able to adversely possess the entire item. So, and again, you have to be continuous, and it needs to be hostile.
Yeah.
So I said I mow part of my neighbor's lawn. He knows I mow it, so that means I have permission, or it doesn't stop me.
Right.
So it's not hostile. I have permission.
Right.
So if I see you on the land, like I see you over there, that's fine if you put your tent over there every summer. I've just given you permission. It's not hostile.
Right.
So therefore, that's one of those requirements is completely out. So, but if you do meet the requirements, which are going to be heavily argued, plus 20 years is a long time to do something like that.
But, you know, in remote parts of the country where there are large tracts of land, that, I mean, it is possible, right? And it's also so not like they use the term squatters' rights a lot of the time. But it is also a court action, too. So someone needs to petition the court to say, hey, this is mine now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All these things have to be done with the court.
Yeah.
You know, because you meet the requirements, there's not a magic, you know, adverse possession fairy that says it's yours now.
Right.
That would be the judge.
And it doesn't apply to public lands.
Correct.
Right. So there are certain disqualifiers there.
You can't
private property.
You can't adversely possess anything against the government.
Right. All right. So how about trespassing? So we have had, whether we like it or not, we've had the assessors out and about accessing property to value it for the town's taxation purposes. What are the rights, if you can share, of folks saying, no, you can't come on my property, even just like accessing the land versus the requirements of allowing them into your house?
So I'm just going to try to use a little logic and supposition here, because I do not know the legal answer to it. I know that you do not need to let the tax assessor into your residence. But I do believe, and this can be addressed with city ordinances, town ordinances, to say like as part of the taxing authority of the town, the city, which we know is effectuated by statute, that value needs to be determined. Might you be able to keep them off your property altogether? Well, then you don't have any right to complain about the assessment of your property. I know that I've heard people like, I've never let the tax man in. I don't know whether that's good or bad.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, if you, so my theory, and I talk about this with my husband all the time because we're like in a constant state of renovation at our house. My theory was like, okay, I'm going to renovate it from the inside out so they don't know that the inside is good until the outside looks good.
Yep. And then you get a for sale sign up.
Yes, we put it for sale. We're out of here.
So I don't know that you can strictly prohibit them by some logic, because you have the ability to tax. I think that they have the right to determine that. If the only way they can determine that is to access the property, I think they'd be allowed to do that. I could completely be wrong, but I'm very confident that if you do not allow them, you literally prevent them from accessing your property whatsoever. If you were to dispute the value, you'd have very few legs to stand on as a result. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, and even outside of that, New Hampshire is an open land state as well, so anyone can access your property unless you have it posted. So think about that as well. Whether you live in town or out in rural New Hampshire, folks have access to your property. They can pass over it unless you tell them that they cannot.
Oh,
and that's
makes
what
me
posting.
More mad than someone turns around in my driveway.
Oh my goodness. I actually just had a friend that posted that the other day, that someone was turning around in their driveway, completely blocked their driveway so they could not get in or out. The school bus couldn't get there. Like, yeah, not awesome.
I turned around in someone's driveway yesterday and I thought about what a hypocrite I am.
Yeah. Well, that just means that you're evolved and you're realizing that those are those mirror moments.
We're going to go with that.
Okay, awesome. All right, so what other things as far as accessing property? Easements of record. So most utilities, right, are going to have an easement to a particular property, like We have New Hampshire Broadband that's in the area now, so they're going to have easements that allow them to bring the wires into your home, electricity, if there's town water and sewer, those types of things.
Right.
But other easements that you may not know about, but you should be able to find in your deed. What does that look like?
So the easements that you typically see in a deed, there's easements that you get the benefit of. So you're called the dominant tenement. There are easements that you are subject to. So you're called the servient tenement. So when you review your deed, you will either see the words together with or subject to, if these easements exist, burdening or benefiting your property. So if you're reading a legal description and it says together with, ooh, what else do I get? And it might say right to pass over your neighbor's property because that's your driveway. And there's a subdivision and that's the only way you could get there via the road. It might say together with beach rights. And so you get to access a community beach together. On the flip side, it might say subject to. So you might be that servient tenement that someone drives across.
Yep.
These should be in your deed. Sometimes they're not. Just because they're not in your deed does not mean that they've gone away. I think it's poor drafting, but there's this thing called legal theory, constructive notice. So none of you realize how actually smart you are. Every little thing recorded in the Registry of Deeds, Registry of Probate, your courts are deemed to be public record. So because it can be discovered, you're deemed to have notice of it. So you'll say, I didn't know about that easement. It wasn't in my deed. Did you have a title search conducted? Yeah. Did you look at it? No. Was it part of record? And there is some argument to it that it really should be in your deed because you have lay persons who are purchasing and selling real estate.
Yeah.
They have attorneys that they pay. They have real estate agents that they pay. So we all have some duties to help them discover that. But the end of the day, that's really what happens with some easements. Most are known about.
Right.
But sometimes we have ones that aren't used anymore, subject to a spring. So those water rights, but that was before town water and sewer came along.
Yeah.
So you don't need it anymore.
Right.
But the right still does exist. I've actually seen some less than honest sellers saying, oh yeah, we haven't used that forever. It still exists, sure, a public record, but we don't use it. And this was a neighbor they were talking to. As soon as they sold it, the new owner was exerting their rights over it. So they had all been in cahoots. And they had no duty of disclosure to this neighbor. So they didn't actually do anything legally wrong. Morally, they were bankrupt. And then this person right away is like, yes, I'm totally going to be using my rights to the spring, and got their backhoe out and started doing whatever they did for excavation.
Okay, so let's talk about the deed for a minute, because I think that this is the most valuable piece of information related to your property. It tells you the parties, who you got it from, who owns it now, what the property actually consists of. Like, you could take this piece of paper and follow the instructions and walk around your boundary. And then also any restrictions or covenants or easements or anything else that your property is burdened by or benefits of, and any references to past deeds. So if there's any missing information, you have a reference. You can keep going back. And it's all public, so you can find it. The deed is like the best piece of information, and you should look at it if you own property and know what it is, because a lot of folks don't know. They received it at closing.
That's the last time they looked at it.
Yep, and they filed it away, or they go, oh, it's in the registry. I don't need this paper anymore. Right. You should keep it. And yeah, they don't know what's in there.
The only rub to that is that there are lots of deeds that don't tell you anything about the property. So they have what's called a historical legal description. Yes. And so it will say, running from Jones' old barn. Jones' old barn has been gone for 75 years. It burned down, and now it's, gosh only knows what it is. It could be a sidewalk. Then it says, to a birch tree. Yeah. Long torn, chopped up and been burnt. Then to a creek. Creek is paved over. Right. And then to an old oak. And then to the point of beginning. Yeah. So what did it describe? I have no idea. And that could be, there might not be a plan. The perfect world is you have a surveyor go out, and they create a plan. It's
Yep.
with GPS. It's perfect. It says you go this way, you go this way,
Yep.
where
With
the
elevations.
where the easements are, and then you have, and say there's 5 or 6 parcels on it, and then you have a deed generated from that.
Yep.
That then gives the meets and bounds description, saying goes left, right, up, down. And then you can even show where the houses might be on it. And so that's a beautiful world. Then even when you have that,
Yeah.
this is the reality. You have a plan that says this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
You have a deed that matches the plan, and then you get the house. That's over here because the builder didn't pay great attention when they put it down and could even put it over the boundaries. That's why people hate when I say this, but it is one of the most honest things I've ever said. Real estate looks very precise. I've got a plan, I've got a deed. So many times it's horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
You know, because people will say, well, can you guarantee that these are my property lines? I'm like, I absolutely can.
Yeah.
I look at paper. I look at black and white.
Yeah.
I can tell you that this is what it says.
Yeah.
Get a surveyor to go out to see the actual lay of the land. Lay of the land. I say that all the time because what we see in the registry is black and white, and maybe it looks wonderful.
Yeah.
But they put the house on the wrong spot.
Well, and I think in any industry, like there are folks that are really great at their job and folks that are not so great at their job. And I had that experience last year. I bought a piece of property and I needed to have a survey and a septic plan drawn up. And it was in a development where one company did half of the development, surveying it, and another company did the other. I was in the not so great half. So I needed to have my surveyor recreate the neighborhood from like the some points that they were able to verify just to back themselves into my lot.
Right.
And it took a really long time, 6-9 months, and it was costly. But if I had gone forward with the original plan, I would have been on somebody else's property when I built my house.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when we talked about that whole, I mow someone else's property and you get that, but they put up the fence with Bob and people argue about it. You can have surveyors who they look at the exact same things with the exact same tools and they look like that.
Yeah.
So you can't, there's competing surveys.
Yeah.
2 people can see the exact same thing and saw the same incident and they saw widely different things.
Yes, because we're people. We're humans.
Highly flawed.
Yes, highly flawed. Oh my goodness. Yeah, surveys, deeds, all of that. Why does New Hampshire not require, well, it's live free or die, right? That's why we don't require any surveys. And for those of you who may be watching that are not from New Hampshire, yeah, we don't require surveys or plot plans at the time of sale. So there is no guarantee unless you make it, well, even when you do have a survey to verify, it still could be incorrect. So be prepared.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why fences make good neighbors, but also just you have to understand when you buy real estate, unless you're in a condo where this is exactly what you own.
Yeah.
Because you own that unit of real estate there that is just the box that you live in. I'm going to finish story, but you think you know what you own, but there's a margin for error. All these things. I think the statute of limitations has run on this. When I was a child, and I grew up in Meredith, we would take the pins that would designate the boundary lines. We would sword fight with them, and so we would play with them. And like, oh, we found this metal in the woods, so we thought it was something interesting. Then later, when someone goes to discern the boundaries, they might drop that surveyor or might drop in a new pin. Because this is, and I don't know if this is urban legend or not, someone will go out to do a plot plan or survey, and they go out with a metal detector.
Yes.
And so they're trying to find the pins in the ground. And so they go out, boop, oh great. Boop, oh no. Boop, because...
Or Mark and his friend dropped their swords.
So people have gone out there successfully, and like, this is what we think it is, so I'm going to drop a new pin in.
Oh my God. My dad tells that same story because one of the more recent times that he had to call the surveyor was when we were younger, and we did the same thing. We pulled the pin, and he was like, "What are you doing? Where did you get that?" And we're just like, "I don't know, out there."
I consider myself lucky now. I can, from the frontage, if I go to both my back corners, the fence that I have in my yard is completely fenced in. It actually runs along the pins, and so I'm sticking with that story. that is my yard. But for some people, you might find that fence is on someone else's yard, and then there's a whole different thing. Do you agree to correct it? Do you have to go to court to get someone directed? Do you have issues then with the city? Have you done an encroachment? Have you violated some setback? So this whole myriad that makes you just want to be a renter your whole life. But I
Don't
think
do
it's
that.
I think it's but I think it's good just to know the realities that not everything is this beautiful little bow.
And you know this because I call you about all sorts of things and I ask you the question 8 different ways just to see if you give me a different answer. And often you do because it depends, right? And I would love to live in a black and white world, and it is not the case, so you just go with it and just be curious and ask the questions and say hi to your neighbor and have that conversation. We had my husband was, if y'all know us, my husband was throwing our Christmas trees for years and years off of a corner of our property, and he was approached by our neighbor, and the neighbor's like, hey, what are you doing? That's my property. And my husband's like, no, it's not. 10 years later, probably more, I said, hey, we should walk our property lines, and he had the realization that he was not throwing them on his property. And and if you've heard him tell the story, it's just so cute because he came inside and he looked very defeated, and he took a shower and he got dressed up and cleaned up like he was going to a meeting, and he got in his car, left the driveway, went around the block to the neighbors, pulled in their driveway and apologized to them after all of that time. But first he cleaned up all of the stuff and put it back on our property. But just seeing it, not from what we think, but what the boundaries actually were within a margin of error, is pretty powerful to know what you own and what you don't own.
And if you can, the best you can discern that and have good neighbors, that's how you're going to have, that's how things are going to go well. Because to make it very real, let's say you have that little aggressiveness between the neighbors because you're throwing the trees there, and you kind of dispute that. And it's not a big deal. And then you go to sell, and the neighbor knows that you're selling. Then they take issue with it. And so at that point, and they'll tell everyone that comes over, by the way, they're on my property. And in that case, you can affect the marketability of your house. And so you have, because you like to poke the bear that was your neighbor, now you might have disclosed, found something that never would have been an issue ever. Might it exist? Yeah, but would it have ever been an issue ever for generations? No, but now it is. So love that neighbor.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that you're going to see in your deed is reference to restrictive covenants and whatnot, things that you can and cannot do with your property that were put there by a previous property owner or developer, right? And some of those subdivisions or associations or whatever we want to call them, where a community of properties are under all of these same restrictions, they're either defunct or they haven't been enforced over time, and that tends to be a concern for folks. And if you look around the neighborhood and you see where it says you're not supposed to have any farm animals, and most of the neighborhood has farm animals, that could lead you to believe that those restrictions don't matter anymore, right?
Right.
But it is still one of those, like, pull out your wallet to enforce these restrictions if you have a problem with your neighbors not following them.
And who enforces them? Because you mentioned, let's say you have a small subdivision and you've got a couple community roads that may or may not be private. Maybe they're owned by the town now, so all the rules in it don't apply to who pays for plowing, etc. But there might be some limits. You might you cannot build anything higher than 3 stories, or it can't be less than 10,000 square feet, which is pretty big. And so the association has the ability to waive that requirement, but the association doesn't exist.
Right.
So let's say that you want to now have moo cows on the property and you want to have chickens, but your neighbor doesn't want you to. And it does say in the declaration, no, you can't.
Right.
Who has the right to enforce that? And I'm sure there's some common law in it that I don't have to deal with, as I'm not a litigator. But if the association there is no association,
Right.
can the individual then enforce that, or
Right.
do these rules not apply anymore?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that, but some people have to cross that bridge to find that out.
Yeah.
And I've seen, like, I'm just not going to buy. I don't, and I don't have. It might have feel like there was something you and I had worked on, and I'm just not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because will it come up? Probably not.
Yeah.
If it did, will it be awful? Yes. Would title insurance protect it? No.
No.
You know, so and would anyone be at fault? No, just you for buying the property, because there will be lots of disclaimers saying
Yeah.
there's no protection for this.
Right.
And
knew
you know it
about
exists exactly on its face.
Exactly. Oh, so many complexities. But being a property owner is very beneficial. So don't let any of that scare you. And as we talked about a number of times, you know, since we've been sitting here, that you know, everything is fine until it's not, and
Right.
you just have to plan
Right.
for those periods in which it's not going to be okay, and have a plan in place. And that would be talk with your attorney. I'm not an attorney. That is not my wheelhouse. Although I have learned a lot of things over the years. Been in the industry for a minute. Yeah, cool. What other things do we want to chat about? And I don't know how much time we have left, but what are some things that you think that consumers should know that we don't convey to them often enough?
I think that buyers in real estate need to be a little more vigilant without completely hounding the real estate agent all the time, to understand some of the complexities of the purchase and sale that they're getting into.
Yeah.
There's different contingencies that if met or not met, then your performance is excused. You don't have to buy that property. Most folks, and yourself excluded from this, so many real estate agents do not understand the purchase and sale agreement. There's this term called due diligence. Due diligence in the standard New Hampshire Realtor Purchase and Sale says there's only a few boxes you tick, and if you don't tick them, that none of these are considered due diligence. So that can mean you get to check these things out. If you don't like them, then you don't have to close. It's a contingency that was not met. Sometimes they just say, "Oh, the due diligence is coming up, and it's too expensive for them. They don't want to close." That's not a thing unless you've said that it's a thing in the contract.
Right.
The contract is everything. You need to say what you want. You need to say what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah.
That's why you have professionals who do these for you. The purchase and sale, even some agents, it is a fill-in-the-blank document. They treat it like a fill-in-the-blank document.
Yeah.
So the document tells you what information you put there.
Right.
I disagree. It's the contract has to bend to your will.
Mm-hmm.
You decide what the terms are.
Yeah.
If it's a square peg in a round hole, number 19, additional provisions. You
Yeah.
get to put in the contract what you want. Agents should be more really familiar with the contract, and so should your buyers. You should understand, because then when you find out that your inability to get financing because of you didn't pay attention to the contract means that you still get to buy it. But if you don't want to buy it, because you can't make you buy it, you don't get your deposit back.
Right.
Your inability to get financing, your home inspection, the dates matter in all those.
Oh, absolutely. And I call them off ramps to the contract, right? If we pass the off ramp, you don't get a second chance.
Yeah.
And they're exit only. You don't get to like, I'm not going to buy the property, get out of the contract, and then come back on. I'm gonna get back in there.
Right.
Like, you need to understand what those off ramps are, what those contingencies are. It is your due diligence. I actually just did a reel on this today, where like, it's when buyers ask me, how's the school system? How's the town to work with? What's the crime rate? Like, how do you like the neighborhood? Don't ask me that, because I am going to be giving you the answers based on my personal filter, right? And that filter may not align with yours. So everything from, what does the neighborhood look like at all times of day, to how much is the insurance, and do I need flood insurance? Is this in a floodplain? And what are the easements and restrictions that are in the deed? You need to review them and determine if they fit what your lifestyle looks like in this particular property. I can't make those decisions for you. I can give you pros and cons of certain things, give you resources, attorneys to speak with, but that's for you to do. And you'll be much happier if you do that research yourself instead of relying on somebody else like me to tell you, you know, my kids didn't go to that school.
Or our kids are out of school.
Our kids are out of school. Yeah, I don't know what it is
Can't
nowadays.
ask me anything that's going on in Meredith, where I graduated a while ago,
Yeah.
or Concord, where my daughter graduated from.
Exactly.
I have no idea what's going on.
Totally out of touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I can tell you cool things that I like about the town.
Right.
You know, where was I? Oh, I was in Waterville. I went to ski journing last weekend, and it was lovely in Waterville. And I looked around and I saw everybody on the snowy golf course having drinks, and I was like, oh right, there's no open container in Waterville. And I'm like, that's one thing I like about this. I don't drink, but that's one thing that I liked about the town.
That's one thing I like about the town.
Yeah. So all sorts of, you know, I can give you like cool highlights, like, downtown Plymouth has the holiday parade, like check it out. But I can't talk to you about the things that are going to be personal decisions for you to make.
Yeah.
But you still have to make them. And although you have so many resources in the purchase process, home inspectors, attorneys, attorneys or title folks, lenders, myself as a real estate agent, all the folks that can provide you all of these resources, it is still your job to do that due diligence.
It is, and it's kind of the nature of the real estate industry now. It's expensive to buy. Values are high, inventory is low, and everyone and their mother has a real estate license. The competition is absolutely crazy out there. So I think the real estate agent's job is to say no to their clients. Probably every transaction, there's some time you have to say no.
Yeah.
Very few people say no now, because it could mean the difference between representing them and not representing them.
Yeah.
Having money to put food on the table.
Yeah.
So, so a lot of these agents can't use their expertise for these folks. So I just like to say that, you know, everyone has their important place in the transaction, but as a buyer especially, like the deal that we had recently, they were trying to. They were going to buy 3 lots, but they didn't. The bank had an issue with it, and so they're like, "Oh, let's just renegotiate and give you less money, or give me all 3 lots for the same price."
Yeah.
And they were trying to renegotiate, and I understand there was no basis for anything that they were asking for, and the deal didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it was far better for the client in the long run. But you should understand the process more. And you're going to hate this, but home ownership is not for everybody.
Right, I agree with that.
And so to be educated about it, and maybe it is, but maybe not now. Not everyone should be able to have a home exactly when they want.
Yeah, absolutely.
My experience, I've done 28 years of foreclosures.
Yeah.
Probably mid 20,000 foreclosures I've done over that time. Not everyone should have owned that house. Bad things happen, but at the same time, if you're a good buyer, you understand the pros and cons of it. You know what you are going to get, what you're not going to get, and if we can set reasonable expectations for folks, there might be less use for me. So maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But it really is. That was a big thing. If I can tell anyone, is you got to be able to say no to your client every now and then, and manage expectations.
Right.
And then the process is a lot smoother. And people are happier, and they have a better understanding of what they're going to get.
And I think if you have a plan too, if you are clear with yourself what your boundaries are, whether they're financial, location, property size, any of those things, if you know what those boundaries are for yourself, then it's easier for you to make decisions and walk away from things when they don't align with those checkboxes that you've created.
Yeah.
And my job as a real estate professional is to support you in those decisions. And although it's kind of a weird industry in that we don't get paid unless you buy something or sell something, my job, regardless of any of that, is to protect and promote your best interest. So if we've seen, and I will tell you, I have worked with clients for several years looking for property, have been in contracts with them, and they've just walked away for a variety of reasons. Once they went into that due diligence phase, it no longer met their requirements, because you're only seeing the property for 15, 20 minutes, and then you're deciding you want to live there for the next 10 years. Like, that's bananas. So your due diligence starts after you have it under contract, unless you're lucky enough and have the time to do it a little bit beforehand. But my job is to make sure that you guys are making the right decisions for yourself, but you have to make the decisions. I can't make them for you.
Yeah, there's a lack of accountability in the industry, and it's just a function of, it's a perfect storm. You have lots and lots of agents. You've got very, very hungry buyers. You have sellers who know that they're more in the driver's seat at these past few years than they might have been at different times, even with interest rates being higher. So it's this perfect storm for get into real estate at your peril, especially if you're a glutton, because it's really not for the faint of heart. If you want to make a living at it, you really have to be all in. You have to be highly educated, and you've got to be knowledgeable and thick-skinned and have good partners that will support you. Because if you try to be an island, you'll be a very lonely island.
And you have to just have a thirst for knowledge, because every industry that we touch in a real estate transaction, you have to have a working knowledge of, and they all change every single day. And it's, it's a lot, but it's fun.
This isn't the most life-affirming Land versus Land that we're doing now about real estate, but understanding, knowing your audience, understanding, reading the room, knowing what some of the pitfalls. Maybe it's not time that we buy this year, honey. Let's wait some time. Let's see what interest rates are doing, or let's learn a whole bunch and go out there and outbid and outperform all these other people who want to buy, because we know what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like, I want to give everybody permission in the buying and selling space that you're consumers. Consumers have rights, right? You have right to representation. You have right to change your mind at any point in the process. Will there be repercussions and consequences for that? Perhaps, depending on what time it is, but you have a right to change your mind. So if you decide today you want to go buy something and you get out in the marketplace and you're like, not doing this, that's fine. And that's, like I said, that's how I've had clients for a long period of time, because their life changes and they're like, this was a good idea now, but it's not anymore. Right. We're going to wait and see what happens. So I want to just convey to you that you have choice and you will continue to have choice. So exercise that. Don't feel pressured into anything. And if you have a home buying or a home selling team that is pressuring you in any way, aside to just make a decision, we don't care what your decision is, just make them. Then, if that team isn't supporting you, and you don't feel safe in making those decisions for yourself and being vulnerable, find a different team, switch out those players.
And it sounds like I'm being goofy. I'm not being anti-media, don't let Good Morning America tell you when you should buy or not buy a house. So many people are dictated by something, say, it's a bad time to buy a home, don't do this. It's all local. Everything is, there are some places in the state that never took a hit from 2008 to 2013. I think our seacoast in Portsmouth, they did swimmingly through the time. So everything is local. So it matters. Don't let anything national tell you what's going on in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and trends. You don't need a McMansion if you don't want a McMansion. If you want a little cabin in the woods, I ask my son now, I'm just like, what do you want to do when you graduate college? He's like, I want to live in my truck in Oregon and I don't want to talk to anybody. Like, cool. That's not the common theme for most kids his age, but that is, that's what he wants to do. So however you're feeling, whatever you want to do in the real estate space is totally valid, and just find folks that will support that for you.
Yeah. Really stay and think local, because you're going to know better in your area. I'm going to know in my area. I can't tell you what's going on in Western Massachusetts. I can't tell you what's going on anyplace else, but I can only tell you where I am.
Perfect. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us again on this reboot of Man vs. Land. So thanks again, Attorney Lipper.
Thank you.
And as always, he is available. I am also available if you have any questions. Nothing here, even though we were talking about legalese, is legal advice. But if you know two folks to reach out to should you have any questions. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And again, I'm Sarah Holland, and welcome, and thank you for following us again on Man vs. Land, and we will see you next time.